Chapter 1. Christmas Eve. It was Christmas Eve. London was very cold and foggy. Scrooge was working in his office. His secretary, Bob Cratchit, was writing letters in the next room. It was a very small room with a very small fire. Bob was very cold. Scrooge did not give Bob much wood for his fire, because he did not like to spend money. Scrooge didn't like anything. He didn't like the people in the streets or the people he worked with. He didn't like eating good food or drinking nice drinks. He especially hated Christmas. Scrooge was an old man. He was very thin, with thin white hair on his head and face. His lips were blue and his eyes were red. He worked in the same dark office for many years. Once it was the office of Scrooge and Marley, and those names were still on the door. But Jacob Marley died 7 years ago, and Scrooge worked on without him. Work was important. Work brought money, and Scrooge always wanted more money. So Scrooge worked hard and made Bob Cratchit work hard too. Work, work, work. "A Merry Christmas, Uncle," said Scrooge's nephew, Fred, when he came into the cold, dark office. "Bah!" replied Scrooge. "Nonsense! He really hated Christmas." "Oh, come on, Uncle," said Fred. "I'm sure you don't mean it." "I do," answered Scrooge. "Why are you merry? You're a poor man." "And why aren't you merry?" asked Fred. "You're a very rich man, and it's a Christmas." "Bah!" said Scrooge again. "Nonsense!" "Please come to have dinner with us tomorrow, Uncle," said Fred. "Goodbye," answered Scrooge. "I don't want to be angry with you, Uncle," said Fred. "So, Merry Christmas." "Goodbye," said Scrooge again. Later, two men came into Scrooge's office. "Mr. Scrooge, Mr. Marley?" asked the first man, because he saw the names on the door. "Mr. Marley died 7 years ago," answered Scrooge. "Mr. Scrooge, then," said the man. "At Christmas it's nice for everyone to give something to poor people. No homes, no clothes, no food. But there are hospitals and other places to help them," said Scrooge. "There are," replied the second man, "but they always need a little more." "It's not my problem," said Scrooge. "I have my work to worry about." The two men left. Later, a boy came to sing a Christmas song, but Scrooge sent him away. When it was time to close the office, Bob Cratchit was excited about the holiday next day. "I imagine you don't want to come to work tomorrow," said Scrooge to Bob. "No, sir, I don't," he answered nervously. "And you want me to give you money for the whole week?" asked Scrooge. "Well, Christmas is only one day a year, sir," replied Bob. "You're still taking my money for nothing," said Scrooge. "Well, if you must, you must. But come to work earlier in the morning after." That night, when Scrooge was at home, he had a surprise visit. He heard the sound of chains coming upstairs, and the Jacob Marley walked through his door. "Marley," said Scrooge, "you're dead. What do you want from me?" "I'm a ghost," said Marley. "I've been traveling since I died." "Why?" asked Scrooge. "Because I'm unhappy," said Marley's ghost. "I was very bad to people when I was alive, and I want to help you not to be unhappy like me after you die." "How?" asked Scrooge. "Three more ghosts will visit you," answered Marley's ghost. Chapter 2. The First Ghost. The first ghost appeared at 1 o'clock in the morning and opened the curtains around Scrooge's bed. The ghost was an old man with long white hair. He wore a short, very white clothes with a bright belt. His arms and legs were bare, and in his hand he held a bunch of green holly. "I am the ghost of Christmas past," he said. "Whose past?" asked Scrooge. "Your past," answered the ghost. "What do you want?" asked Scrooge. "To help you," answered the ghost. "Come." Scrooge got up from his bed. Together they flew through the wall, and London disappeared. Scrooge saw they were looking at the place in the country where he lived as a boy. They saw many boys going home across the fields, happily shouting "Merry Christmas" to each other. Then he saw Scrooge as a boy, and he was reading on his own in an empty classroom. When he saw himself, Scrooge sat down at a desk and started to cry. "I wish that I gave some money to that poor boy who sang Christmas songs to me yesterday," said Scrooge. The ghost smiled. "Let's see another Christmas," he said. This time Scrooge saw the office where he first worked. He saw Mr. Fezziwig, the man he worked for, and his wife. Young Scrooge was helping them prepare the office for a Christmas party. Soon there were many young people there. They were dancing, listening to music, and eating food. Even Scrooge was dancing and enjoying himself. At the end of the party, Mr. and Mrs. Fezziwig said "Merry Christmas" to everybody. "I wish that I said something to Bob Cratchit yesterday," said Scrooge. The ghost smiled again. "Another Christmas," he said. Scrooge saw a beautiful woman smiling with her children in a warm home. The door opened, the father came in, and his two arms were full of Christmas presents. Scrooge looked at the woman. She was his girlfriend when he was a young man. She left him because he was more interested in money than in her. When he looked at the happy family, Scrooge understood that he lost really important thing. "No more!" shouted Scrooge sadly. "Leave me, ghost!" The first ghost disappeared, and Scrooge was back in bed and sleeping deeply. Chapter 3. The Second Ghost. Later, Scrooge woke up suddenly. He looked around his bedroom. There was nobody there. He went to the door of his living room. "Come in, Scrooge," said a voice. He opened the door and saw something very strange. The room looked so different. The walls of the room were full of Christmas trees, and there was a big fire burning. The most delicious kinds of Christmas foods were on the table. There was holly all around the room, and the green leaves were bright with the light from the fire. A happy young giant with a torch was sitting on top of all the food, and the torch was lighting the whole room. He was wearing a long green clothes. He had curly brown hair and a hat. Come in," said the giant. "I'm the ghost of Christmas present." "If you have something to teach me," said Scrooge, "take me anywhere you want. I learned a lot from the first ghost." "Touch my dress," said the ghost. Scrooge did, and soon the trees and the food and the room disappeared. Scrooge found they were walking in a London street on Christmas morning. The shops were full of lovely things to eat. Everyone there was happy. The ghost took him to the Cratchit's house, where they were preparing their small Christmas dinner. Scrooge watched as the poor family ate one goose and some potatoes and a very small Christmas pudding. They were still as happy as if they were eating King's dinner. Scrooge looked at Tiny Tim. the youngest child, who was ill and couldn't walk. Will he be here next Christmas? He asked. If someone helps, replied the ghost. They left the Cratchit's poor but happy house and walked through the snowy streets of London. Everyone was going out to evening parties with their friends and families. Suddenly, they were in a cold, grey, empty place. Scrooge and the ghost looked through the window of a small house. Inside, there was a big family in a small room. They were all singing Christmas songs together. They were very happy. Who are they? Asked Scrooge. They are poor miners, said the ghost. They work hard under the ground. The ghost took Scrooge back to London, to Scrooge's nephew, Fred's house, and there was a big party. Fred was telling everyone about his visit to his uncle. When I said Merry Christmas to him, he replied, Nonsense, said Fred. Everyone laughed. He's rich, said Fred, but he doesn't do anything good with his money, and he doesn't enjoy Christmas Day. Every year I'll ask him to our party and wish him Merry Christmas. Perhaps one day he'll understand and give some money to poor Bob Cratchit too. Scrooge and the ghost watched Fred and his friends all evening. Chapter 4. The Third Ghost. Finally, the ghost took Scrooge home, and as he disappeared, the church clock rang midnight. At once a new ghost appeared, much more frightening than the other two. A long black coat covered him from head to toe. You're the ghost of Christmas yet to come, said Scrooge nervously. The dark ghost said nothing and did not move. I imagine you're going to show me the things which haven't happened yet, Scrooge said, looking at the strange ghost. The ghost silently moved its head a little and pointed with its hand. Scrooge suddenly found himself in the middle of the city of London. He saw many of the people he worked with every day, and they were changing, buying, and selling money. The ghost stopped and pointed to some men standing together, and they were talking. I don't know what happened. I only know he's dead, said the first man. What did he do with his money? Asked the second man. He did not give it to me, said the first man, laughing. His funeral will not be great, said another man. Why? Asked the second man. He had no friends. Nobody will go, answered the first man. Why did the ghost want him to listen to this conversation? Scrooge did not know, but he knew the ghost did not answer questions, so he did not ask. He looked around and tried to see himself, but he was not standing on his usual corner, and there was another man doing business. Next, the ghost took him to a bad part of London, and he never went there before. The streets were small and dark and full of the poorest people. They went into a dirty shop full of every kind of horrible old things, metal, bones, books, clothes. Scrooge watched as three people brought things to sell to the shopkeeper. They were from the same dead man's house. The first had some small things, buttons, pencil case. He does not need these now, said the first woman, pointing to the towels, silver teaspoons, and boots. Look, Joe, said the other woman, and showed the bed curtains and blankets she took from the dead man's bed. Is this shirt from the dead body? Asked Joe. Yes, she answered. He doesn't need a new shirt now. He's dead. This could happen to me when I die, thought Scrooge. Suddenly, Scrooge found himself in another terrible room. It was very dark, with just a little light coming through the window. There was a bed with no curtains on it, and on the bed she'd covered a dead body. The ghost pointed to the body, as silent as ever. Scrooge looked. Who was this dead man? Why were there no friends or family there to cry over the body, to feel sad that he died? The ghost still pointed. Scrooge understood it wanted him to look at the face of the dead man, but he couldn't. I cannot look at this man's face, said Scrooge. But if someone is feeling something because this man is dead, show that person to me. The ghost took Scrooge into another room. A woman stood up nervously when her husband came in. Is there any news? She asked. When I went to ask him if he could pay the money 1 week later, he said, an old woman told me he was dead. That's good news, she said. I'm sorry. I mean that now we have time to find the money we have to pay. No ghost, said Scrooge. I want to see someone who's sorry about death, not someone who's happy because of death. The ghost took him to Bob Cratchit's house. He saw the Cratchit family sitting quietly around the fire. They were talking about Tiny Tim. I met Mr. Scrooge's nephew, Fred, said Bob, and he said he was very sorry to hear about Tiny Tim. Bob turned to his family. We can never forget that he was a good, gentle boy, even if he was just a little child. No, never, father, shouted all the children. Tell me, ghost, said Scrooge, who was the dead man we saw? The ghost took him to a churchyard. It was a dark place with the walls all around, and no flowers on the graves. The ghost pointed to one grave. Before I look, said Scrooge, tell me, are these things really going to happen? Or they are maybe going to happen? The ghost stood in silence. Scrooge looked at the name on the grave. It said, Ebenezer Scrooge. Was I the dead man? He asked. The ghost pointed at the grave, then at Scrooge. Chapter 5 Christmas Day Scrooge fell down and held the ghost's hand and woke up to find himself holding the bedpost of his own bed. He got dressed quickly and said to himself, now I'll lose the lessons I've learned from these three ghosts. He laughed, the first time he laughed for years. He saw a boy in the street. What day is it today? He asked. It's Christmas Day, said the surprised boy. Go and buy that big turkey from the butcher's shop, said Scrooge. Here, 10 pence for you. I will send money to Bob Cratchit, he thought. Scrooge walked excitedly along the street saying Merry Christmas to everybody. When he met the man who wanted help for the poor the day before, he told him to come and get a lot of money. Then Scrooge went off to his nephew Fred's house. Fred was very surprised to see him. What do you want, uncle? He asked. I came to have dinner, said Scrooge. Can I? Of course you can, answered Fred. Fred was very happy, and so were his wife and all their friends, and they all had a lovely party together. Chapter 6 Boxing Day Scrooge went to work very early next morning. He wanted to be in the office before Bob Cratchit got there. Bob was 18 minutes late. He was frightened that Scrooge will be angry. He started writing very quickly. What's this? Said Scrooge in his old voice. Why were you late? I'm very sorry, sir, said Bob. I don't like it, he shouted. So I'm going to. Bob waited, very frightened. I'm going to pay you more money, said Scrooge, laughing. Merry Christmas, Bob. Scrooge asked him to go and buy some more wood for the fire. Chapter 7 Happily Ever After That afternoon, Scrooge took Bob Cratchit out for a drink and told him that he wanted to help him and his family in the future. Scrooge did everything he said and even more. He became a friend of the Cratchit family, and he was like a second father to Tiny Tim. Some people laughed at him because he changed, but Scrooge did not mind. He knew that There are always people who laugh when good things happen.